That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about, I know, one of the things we wanted to get into was what is it like to be, a data professional in a startup environment? And kind of, we might go back and forth a little bit about what those differences are between, because my experience is primarily enterprise. And so we could talk about some of those variances there.
For sure. I think even within startups, right, there's a variety of experiences you'll have based on startup size, maturity, what they're actually doing. So for me, a lot of my startups were that I worked in were machine learning, especially computer vision. And so the way they kind of did the hiring is they bring up a team of researchers who are building the models, and they'd have to and stuff themselves, but a lot of them come from so production ready code wasn't always the focus, and nor should it be very early. You're still trying to figure out your approach and find product market fit. And then I would come in either as the sole engineer, as kind of an adjunct to these research teams, or part of a small group of engineers, so 3 or 4 people at most, and kind of do handle everything in the machine learning development lifecycle, which is very similar to the software development lifecycle, but there are like some very key differences and different feedback loops that happen in that cycle. So you have things like collecting, ingesting it, storing it somewhere that's accessible for the researchers, but then also accessible for things like your model evaluation. Then you have model training, model evaluation. That's a whole loop right there. You have the annotation. So especially in like computer vision, you have to tag what little thing is, and that's a whole discipline itself. Um, then you have deployment, research. I'm sorry, release engineering, things like that. So a lot of times I was handling all of that pipeline besides like the model training. Even within like model training and evaluation, that one of the things I did very often was automate that process. Uh, so that our researchers have to change a bunch of code or do anything crazy to train a new model. They just like push a button, send a job to the cloud, get a report back on how well it performed and where it missed and all that sort of stuff. So my experience, my experiences are really about owning this long process pipeline end to end, owning the products within it, training pipeline, evaluation pipeline, uh, annotation tools, uh, the whole platform for accessing the data. All that stuff was about owning that. So it's a lot of product management, project management, product ownership, along with along with ops skills. Because oh well, if you're building all this tooling infrastructure, you also have to deploy it and make sure people can use it. So you're also now doing cloud engineering, DevOps sort of stuff on top of it. And then we are also going to throw MLOps on top because we need to know how the models are doing in production. So you need
Right.
to make sure you know observe observability, log, this and that. So my experience is wearing a million different hats, which I like. I have tech HD. I also have real like biological HD. So working in startups like really fit very well because before that, when I was working at more focused enterprise kind of companies, I get bored super easy. Like, there's a
Yeah.
lot of process. You're only working on one little piece of something, um, and so once I like squeezed out whatever learning I could, I would just get kind of bored and unhappy. And going to startups is great because sometimes you move on when you want to. Sometimes you're forced to move on because startups fail or they need to resize and things like that. So, um, and I've worked at startups of all sizes. The last one I worked at before independent, I was there for 4.5 years. I was the second full-time engineering hire behind the current CTO. Uh, First person, uh, worked very closely with, I think, I started with one researcher, so it was like a very close
Oh, wow. Yeah.
collaboration, and building everything from scratch. When I had um, very little infrastructure set up, there was a lot of 0 to 1 scaling, uh, and I joined just before they've closed their seed round, and by the time um, I was let go, that they had we had already closed a series early in the year and all that. So like I was there for a lot of growth and then contraction afterwards. There were some like layoffs after that as well. Um,
Yeah.
so which is kind of the story of a lot of startups right now with interest rates going up and then some policy things, the removal of research credits and things like that just made things I think difficult for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
yeah, I was let go October I think, and took the opportunity to finally go off on my own, and ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think, in contrast, like my experience in like I worked at AT&T for 15 years. And so big organization, um, and each uh there's a central like CDO, right? And then each organization within the corporation has their own data team, right? And so in some cases, in some orgs were big and we had multiple people. And like you said, we each worked on this little piece and it was incredibly boring because you do your little piece and sometimes you don't even ever get a chance to see what the whole thing looks like. Um, and then, I don't know, but in probably 50% of my time there, I spent my time in smaller organizations and I was like one of just a couple people. And so a lot of times in those situations, especially the last org I was in before I left, um, I was wearing multiple hats, right? I was very much the DevOps person. I was very much the cloud infrastructure person and the data engineer. And then I had a couple of people that helped me with the BI stuff because uh, I'm not super creative, and so visually I needed help. So I had a couple of people that did that piece. But yeah, I mean, you often, I think, even in larger organizations, sometimes you fall into those situations where, like, I literally uh, procured a Azure account and license, and completely from scratch spun up our environment in Azure, uh, to migrate from AWS to Azure. And uh, so sometimes even in, enterprise situations, you end up in an org in the enterprise where you're having to do all the things all at once.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think for some people, some personality types, that's a good thing, and for others, it's like, no, please, I want to focus on this one. I don't think there's
yeah.
any right or wrong way to do it. It just really is like you need to find what matches your needs, which will change over time as well.